Welcome back to the Hello Velocity podcast, where we help corporate women level up without burning out. I'm your host, Brittany Canaski, leadership coach and trainer here at Hello Velocity. And today we're joined by Charlotte Berry. Charlotte is a workplace communications specialist who helps businesses fix everyday communication issues that lead to turnover, tension, and missed deadlines. She works with managers and employees to develop practical communication skills, especially when it comes to working across different generations. She keeps things real, relatable, and useful, whether she's leading a workshop or chatting on a podcast like today. And she believes effective communication is essential for successful careers and thriving businesses. Welcome, Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You, Brittany. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and I was thinking as we were prepping for this, and I love to share this about each of my guests, is thinking back to when we met. And I remember it was a networking event around Christmas time. I think it was actually an ugly sweater Christmas party networking event. But do you even remember what year that was? I think it's been a few years.
I think it was the year you got married because we talked about you taking a break over Christmas and honeymooning and that kind of things.
Yeah, that sounds right.
What?
And yeah, so probably, yeah, that was 2023. So yeah, that makes sense. It's been a few years now. And yeah, and actually, when I was thinking about it too, that was something that stood out in our conversation. And I'm sure why we hit it off. I remember we were standing, in a corner chatting for a while. But something that stood out to me about our conversation is that thinking how open-minded you were when I was sharing about some of my unconventional things when it came to my wedding and my husband and I are not having kids and that, just a few things, owning my own business, all of these things. And I remember thinking, wow, you were so supportive. And I know you even talked about your own family and how supportive you are of your kids who are similar age to me or maybe a little bit younger than me, and how taking the unconventional path can be something that even someone I just met could be supportive, because I remember during that time when I was planning my wedding, so many people would just ask the same questions over and over again of just the expecting traditional things in a big wedding and the when are you going to start having kids, and we were just the opposite, like tiny wedding, not having kids. So I remember that really stood out to me, and I really appreciated that about our conversation.
Well, and in my earlier days, I did some things a little less conventionally. I homeschooled my children for a long time for part of their education, which is kind of part of my story to hear. And so got a lot of questions and, strange looks and like I was from another planet or something. So I've been in that position. I've been in that place before.
Yes. I feel like I've spent most of my life in that place where I choose unconventional things or I go against the grain and then have to explain it to a million people. And that's how I felt around the wedding, is that I had to almost explain myself or justify myself and my decisions to even strangers that I was meeting, or even just in the wedding planning process. So yeah, it's nice to have other people who are open-minded and like to go against the grain. Yeah, that being said too, about your path, I would love to hear a bit more about what brought you to where you are today in communications consulting.
Absolutely. It is a very interesting path. I saw somebody said something one time about my LinkedIn and said, there's nothing on your history that says you should be this. But then when they talk to me, they realize I really am qualified. But started my first job out of college, huge Fortune 100 company, Bell South. That's when there were regional Bell operating companies under the big Mama Bell thing, and was really honored because it was a great job to get. But I found myself at least 10 years, sometimes 20 years younger than my coworkers. I had big time imposter syndrome, even though we didn't have the name for it then. But just didn't feel like I belonged, didn't feel like I was qualified. And so for the first couple of years, just learned as much as I could. And I came across a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Was published back in the 1930s and is still relevant today, which blows my mind. And some of the concepts I learned there was just about how to be more confident in talking to people. It was how to be interested, not interesting, and things like that. And so these were thoughts that I just latched onto and would practice them with people. Well, over the years in my corporate job, I became more confident. I became more qualified. I felt better leading meetings or addressing people that were still 20 or 10 or 20 years older, but just through those skills that I developed, really applied that. Fast forward, end of 10 years, I had my first child. I had the opportunity to stay home with what became three children, and was really intentional in what I taught them because of what I had learned in my 20s about dealing with people and how to have good conversations and how to listen well. I really tried to instill that in my own children. And so when they hit college and high school, they were doing some really cool things, not because they were geniuses, but because they could talk to anybody that they needed to talk to. And they would take the initiative to talk to professors, to find out about internships, to find out about clubs, to see what they could do. And they weren't intimidated to talk to adults. And I was really excited about that. And I thought, well, it was about the time I wanted to start moving back into the business world, and thought if I've helped three young people learn these skills and implement them and do well with them, let's teach a few more. And so it kind of grew into a fascination and my learning about different generations in the workforce and how they each relate to different people and why they relate differently to people depending on the age. And I did an informal study that said communication between generations was an issue, and a couple of years ago, and then found some documented studies and decided to take off from there.
Yeah, I love how your story is such an organic growth story of how you got into what you're doing, and it really just came from this both it seems like eagerness to learn, but also curiosity and your own personal experiences, your own professional experiences, and kind of combining it all together, and now creating resources and teachings that are so valuable for even more people. That's really powerful.
How I differentiate my services is that I use these same type of principles, or at least the basics of them, to transform my own career in my 20s. I was able to teach it to my children so that they didn't have to unlearn anything. They just kind of launched into their 20s with a lot of these skills and have added on from there. But I can also relate to people in all ages at a company. The CEOs and owners are in my generation now, but yet I've raised children that are now in their 20s. And so I've really been able to witness and live, with all these generations and understand it a little better.
Yes, and that is such a powerful tool and a
Mhm.
powerful skill that not enough people, in my opinion, have in the current workplace. So I know we'll get more into that too, and I'm excited to hear more about your experience and your teachings about that. But I know you even mentioned confidence already, and I know I told you this is our theme for this season of the podcast. So how do you see confidence connecting to the work that you're doing in the workplace?
See it helping in multiple ways. I think back of my own self, back in my early days of a career, and the first couple of years, I really didn't feel comfortable having some of the discussions that I needed to have. And it was all a learning process. And I realized you can't walk into a job knowing everything. But I think within a couple of years, developing the confidence that even if I didn't know something, I had resources to figure it out. And I could explain, articulate myself well enough to say, no, I don't know this, but I'm going to find out and get back to you. Or here's what I think our plan should be. Or I just growing confidence with the knowledge was beneficial. I think on the flip side, if you talk about workers in today's environment, there are so many questions and so many ways that you can approach jobs and projects and lifestyles and whatever you choose to do, that having confidence in what you're doing just gives you extra strength. It gives you extra tools to be able to interact with people whenever and wherever you need to. And I will say it's not something you have to be an extrovert to learn. I do talk to people that say, oh, I'm introverted or I'm shy or I don't like to talk to people. And that's perfectly okay. I really like my downtime too, but I've developed skills and can help people develop skills to where when they need to be, quote, on in a conversation or in a business environment, they can do that. And then when it's done, they can go rejuvenate and refresh without anybody around. So you don't have to love talking to people to be good at these skills.
Definitely. That's a really good perspective that I don't think gets talked about enough, is that a lot of times there's this idea that we have in our head that being confident means that you are, the center of attention and you're extroverted, or, you are the most energetic in the room. And that's something I know I've struggled with in my own journey too, because I am an introvert and I love my downtime. I love quiet. I love being alone. And it's just not that image that we have of,
Yeah.
the confident person in front of the room. So it's something that I've constantly been working through, I think, myself.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, something else you kind of touched on that I wanted to ask you more about is this idea of to the multiple generations and how confidence plays into it. Because I know you kind of touched on a lot of times younger in your career or newer in a career, you don't typically have that confidence. And I think we talk about that a lot, especially, starting a new job or again, just starting your career for the first time. You're likely not going to inherently have that confidence, and that's okay. We can work through these skills and find it in different ways. But do you see it, since you're talking about different generations in the workplace and communication, do you see it on the other end too of more seasoned people in their career? Is there that lack of confidence? And or I'm curious if it's almost a sub conversation that you're having too, is there a lack of confidence in communicating with younger generations, since there is such a, I don't know, difference there these days?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I want to flip back to your first comment about younger workers coming into first jobs, or even older workers coming into first jobs, or a new job. There's a balance between confidence and humility. And so I want to be careful you can have both. In other words, you can be confident in where you are and what you say and how you talk to people, but at the same time, being teachable is really, really important. So, confidence is not all about knowing everything or appearing that you know everything or appearing that you have it all together. Confidence is knowing what is appropriate at what times. And I think that's a real hard thing, especially when you first enter the workforce, of knowing, well, should I be talking all the time to prove that I'm confident and that I belong here versus, oh, I don't feel confident to say anything, so I'm not going to say anything. I really think that with the confidence is having teachable uh, spirit or a teachable mind frame. That's really, they really need to go in tandem. Because, like you said, confidence isn't necessarily being the center of attention in the room, etc. It's being the person that knows, in my opinion, what to do when, what to say when. That's far knowing when not to talk is as important as knowing when to talk. Now, to take it to the other extreme, as far as the age differences and the older workers, heck yeah, it's very intimidating when you aren't aware, when you've been in the workforce for decades and you don't understand either language that's being spoken or terms or phrases or what's popular or what's not or what social media is or how to use it and that kind of thing. So yes, it can be a little bit of, oh, well, these people are so different and they know things I don't, and are they going to take my jobs? And that's exactly what I do with companies. I want people to understand and appreciate the strengths that we all have. If people can start looking at different generations, not from a difference perspective, but in a strength perspective, then I think that helps everybody involved.
That's huge. Yeah, that's so true. And something else you touch on too is this teachable mindset and being open. And I see it too on this other end that you're mentioning too, of seasoned employees who are almost intimidated by younger generations, or again, there's just, you see these glaring differences and it can be off-putting, I imagine too. I'm like, even me, I know sometimes there's like, wait, there's a new lingo for this, there's new words for that, and I'm constantly Googling them, trying to keep up myself. But I think that's part of the process, and sometimes what we're missing on both sides or all ends of the spectrum of age and generations is that openness and willingness to learn and be teachable. And just because you've been in this role longer doesn't mean you can't learn from someone new, right? And like
Absolutely.
having that open mindset of, yeah, we're going to speak differently. We're going to have different social media apps that we're using, and we're going to communicate differently over email, text, phone, all of those things. But we need to be open and understand where the other people are coming from and be teachable of, hey, you mentioned this word in this meeting and I have no idea what it means. Can you help me out? Or let me Google real quick so I can learn and not just shut you out or roll my eyes, in a meeting or something like that.
Well, and I think that brings in the concept of courage, of establishing relationships with your coworkers. And you might not be best buddies and hang out on weekends, but like you said, if you're in a meeting and somebody uses a term that isn't familiar with the other person, when it's appropriate to speak up, I see nothing wrong and think it's admirable for somebody to say, I haven't heard that term. Can you tell me what it means or can you help me understand it more? Because again, if you, from both sides of the spectrum or all sides of the spectrum, if you are showing a willingness to learn, be open, have the courage to ask, it just builds trust.
Definitely. Yeah, it's again little habits like that that can bridge the gap, in the room or at least even with that individual if you pull them aside after and say, "Hey, I didn't want to bring this up in front of everyone because maybe you are embarrassed and that's okay, but if you still can talk through it with them and yeah, you never know what you might learn and you might
Yeah,
have fun along the way too. Like it
right,
might be
right.
pretty entertaining and you might watch some, I don't know, funny videos from them or something. They might be able to share some cool things with you that way too. So as we're kind of dipping our toe in this conversation about the different generations in the workplace, and I know I've talked about this a lot or I've learned a lot in my journey as well, but I know you're talking with organizations about this and digging a bit deeper. So I'm curious, what other common issues are you seeing in the workplace with people across generations and how they're communicating?
I think a big part of being in business today is understanding that it's appropriate to communicate with different people in different ways, that it's not a one size fits all email blast or printed paper that everybody gets. Now, on the flip side, a company with 1,000 um, employees cannot individually customize, communication for 1,000 different people. However, being open to disseminating information in different ways is big. I really believe that some of this most important communication is that between managers and workers today. So yeah, from the company standpoint, they can do things in different ways to reach people. But I think the key to successful organizations is when a manager, whether they have two people working for them or 20, can adapt to their employees to just relate to them better. And an example would be the way people like feedback. Back in when I first started in the corporate world, we did performance reviews twice a year. And there's no way that I could accurately remember what I did 5 months ago, much less remember if it did it well or not. Today's environment very much, and younger employees very much request and need more frequent feedback. And it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. In other words, it's good, but it serves to reinforce what they're doing well, and it serves to correct what they're not. Because if a new employee is making an error that costs money, whether it's lost time, lost finances, whatnot, costs, then if it's if you wait 6 months to correct it, it's going to cost a lot of time or money, whatever that is. However, if you have a frequent check in every couple of weeks or so and you catch it, that's not that big of a loss. And it's more, it just can take quicker action. They can take quicker action. And the downside is that means a little bit more work on the managers, which isn't a bad thing, but managers are already overwhelmed with everything. So it's finding a balance to give that feedback and to still stay productive and do what needs to be done. So that's one of the biggest issues I see from generational, and also expectation of why you do things. And I was having a conversation earlier today with somebody is that in today's environment, it's much more required, relevant to explain why you're asking somebody to do something. It's not necessarily just for the bottom line and not the upper manager says, because I say so, or that's how it's done. It's taking the time to evaluate, yes, this is why we do things. This is how your job is contributing to the overall goal of the company or the overall goals that we have.
Yeah, the feedback is an interesting piece. I've seen that too, not just in how frequent you have to give feedback, but also how you deliver the feedback.
Mhm,
That's come up a ton in my trainings even
mhm,
when we're not talking about generations in the workplace, but we're just talking
mhm,
about giving feedback or expectations,
mhm.
and you can see and hear the divide in the room when there are younger versus I always say seasoned, not older because I don't wanna be called old either. So, seasoned versus younger, newer managers in the room, the people who are more seasoned say, "Well, when I was,
Yeah,
new in my career, no one patted me on the back for
yep,
just doing my job," and that's the language I hear a lot is "You're just doing your job, I'm not gonna tell you you're doing a good job," essentially, of like,
right,
"This is what's expected of you, just do it,"
mhm,
and that's again and I think that language keeps coming back in, and I'm just thinking of all these other interactions I've had and heard with people is that, "Well, that's not how I was treated when I was your age in corporate America or in, whatever work environment, so
mhm,
that's not how I'm gonna treat you," and I think that's so limiting to have that mindset and that belief and even directly using that language to the other person. It's like, "Oh, well,
sure,
no one treated me with respect and encouragement, so I'm not gonna do that to you." Like, really? That's how you're gonna show up in the world and, like, you're not gonna try to make the culture, the workplace a better place than what it was for you? Like, you're just like, "Oh, well, I didn't have a good time, so no one can have a good time," is what it feels
yeah.
like to me.
Very selfish oriented. Well,
Mhm.
and to carry that thought a step forward, I have heard of younger workers who really do, and I hate to use the word pester, but are constantly asking their managers, how am I doing? How am I doing? Is this right? What do I do next? What do I do next? So there's a balance between having somebody that really needs an answer when they're first getting started, needs help, to transitioning them to making decisions or mm, taking action without that direct. And again, it varies based on personality, the job description. Are you dealing with life and death saving type things versus a business environment where there's a little more wiggle room? So it's kind of of figuring out that again, that balance is yes, feedback is really important, but if somebody is asking for it daily, that's a little concerning. And so there just needs to be some changes there. But again, it's all about figuring out that right balance between those things.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think all of these examples too, it goes back to both sides, both parties involved of, manager and employee, like, you need to be talking about these things if something's not working for you. If
Mhm,
your employee is interrupting you all the time and you can't focus and they should be able to move forward with this project or whatever it is, then you need to have that conversation with them, and obviously, again, everyone's different in how they will receive that or how you can frame that conversation, but it needs to be a conversation and don't just get annoyed and shut them down and, be angry about it, but just address it and say, "Hey, we did this training last week. You should be at a point where you can run with it or
mhm,
get to this point, and then we'll check in on our one-on-one on Thursday. If it's
mhm,
extremely urgent and you think something bad is happening, then definitely come by and we'll talk about it, but for these types of questions, save them for a meeting." Like, something as simple as that, just 2 sentences, just anything like that, just to communicate, and then same on the other side, if you need more feedback, then ask your manager for feedback and say, "Hey, I do best if you could provide some feedback in our weekly one-on-ones, or maybe once a month. Could we have an hour meeting where we're talking about the projects I've been working on and I can get more concrete feedback?" Something like that. Like, we both sides need to take ownership over it and not just, you know, get further apart and get more angry or more frustrated. And I
or
think that's
tension or resentment, all of those
Mm.
things.
Yeah, that's I think what I see most is that people would rather just avoid it and complain about it to everyone else
Yes,
and not
yes.
address it head on too.
And I just did some training earlier with a group online, and it was look for these signs. For if you're a manager, you're a business owner, look for somebody disengaging, look for that body language, look for those short, snappy answers. There are things that can indicate that the communication is not right.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great point too. Yeah, something I know we've talked about in the past too, that I know we both see a lot too, is that people aren't listening to other people's opinions a lot anymore. So, and I've seen this a lot too, and I think more generalizing how it typically happens is if someone newer or younger is in the meeting and they try to speak up, it can feel like they're not being listened to or their ideas are being shut down by people who've been there longer and say, "Oh, we tried that 5 years ago, it didn't work," or, "Oh, I know it won't work because of this," or they just say, "No, it won't work." So, what are you seeing when it comes to opinions and how people can maybe better navigate those conversations in the room?
That's so touchy because it is so many aspects of our lives now.
Mm,
Families, politics, just everything. But in a business environment, hopefully people can be a little bit more agreeable, less offended, etc. And that's tough. If you're a new person and you have ideas, then you want to share them, but at the same time, you need to understand and respect that there is history and there are some reasons why companies do things the way they do. So I think from a young person perspective, from an older person's perspective, or a more seasoned worker, like you said, I think it is important for them to start listening more to ideas, even if they're not possible to implement, even if they're not cost efficient or whatnot. And I think it's that dialogue, as you said, is so important because in my brain, if somebody comes into a company, regardless of their age, and they have new ideas about something, I think it means a lot if somebody's been there a while, listens and says, that's, an idea. We did try that, a few years ago, but here was the situation and maybe we should readdress it again. Or, and there may be like a legal reason they can't do something. I can't think specifically, but if somebody says that's more seasoned says, well, that is an interesting idea, but legally we can't do it because of XYZ, then the person giving the idea doesn't feel like they're stepped on or ignored. There's a legitimate reason. If they get the response of, "Well, we tried that 3 years ago and didn't work," then that's more dismissive, and I if it's a really good idea, then maybe the new person puts a little more research into it, and, like, if something they feel strongly about, and, they do a little research off, separately or whatnot, and then bring it back to the manager and say, "I realized that that didn't work 3 years ago. Here's some things that I why I think it might work." Now, it's risky to do that because if you have a manager that shuts you down completely, there's nothing you can do about it. But in my opinion, it also shows initiative that if a person has an idea that they feel strongly about and they spend their own time or some time preparing, to me, that's a good quality that a manager could recognize in somebody.
definitely. So, what are some common topics or themes that you're teaching about when it comes to communication across different generations these days?
Well, the thing that I started with from the beginning, is, and I start all my teaching with this, is that the underlying theme should be respect. Now, respect means different things, showing different, and so I spend time with people talking about what does respect look like, and it might be things like listening openly, like you were just talking about, um, considering new options, letting a person speak before you jump in to say something else. But respect is really important. And because if you don't respect somebody, then you're less likely to try to build bridges to make the communication stronger. So the respect and courtesy also. Clarity is really important to make sure that you understand how to communicate clearly so that you're not giving a general comment or statement or direction, assuming somebody knows what you mean. And so it's taking the extra step to make sure that somebody has the information they need, whether they've requested information from you or whether you're asking someone to do that. Being clear about it, about the expectations of when it's done, where it's done, how it's done, and a lot of times why it's done. We take the extra effort to get these proposals ready because we're presenting it to a brand new client tomorrow. So more of the understanding, so the clarity is there. And then also what we just talked about, the feedback. Feedback is so important across all aspects, not just the manager to the employee, but um, finding out about the culture and management. And they're very it's giving feedback to management is different than giving feedback to an employee. But still there needs to be those kinds of tools in place for companies to get along well and or the workers to get along well. So I'd say those main things were the things I stress and share.
Yeah, I love this idea of clarity because that's something we kinda touched on earlier too of different, slang words or different language different generations use. And I know earlier we talked about more younger generations and slang words, but then I see it too a lot of times thinking about seasoned employees and certain phrases that we just use in corporate culture over and over again that don't actually mean anything specific,
Yes.
or they're just such overused phrases or idioms that I think, the one of the stereotypical things I hear a lot, and I'm sure I'm guilty of saying it too, is "We'll circle back to that."
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
first of all, what does that really mean? Yeah, it means we're gonna talk about it again, but could we be a little bit more clear of say, "Hey, let's schedule time to talk about this
Yes.
next week. Set a date, set a time, and what specifically do we need to address?"
Yes.
Just that's one little example of where I see the communication bridges. you know, we say things that don't actually mean anything, and if we just said what we mean, we all would be so much better off, honestly,
Yeah,
in all aspects of our lives.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, we could probably do a whole discussion on just things. And I think I did a poll one time on LinkedIn just for fun, asking what overused phrases were they tired of in the work world.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
was that
those one of them.
yeah, I was gonna say that's the one that I think that comes up all the time, and, yeah, something, kind of shifting gears, looking at the personal side of different generations in the workplace or just different generations living together. So we've talked about when one of the first times we chatted or sat down for coffee, I'd shared my journey with you about how I had my quarter life crisis when I was in corporate America and I was 26, 27 at the time. And that's essentially what brought me here to my own business and coaching. And I'd worked with a coach and then I absolutely love the process. And similar to you, I was so curious. I wanted to learn more and took a training program and kind of it seems like kinda reset my life at, 27 and started over, started a whole new, business, of course, but then also in a whole new industry and doing a whole new different type of work. But later you had shared that this was something that really helped you understand different generations too, because that was so I don't remember exactly what you said, but it was just something that you had never thought of before of doing something like that. So can you share more about
Absolutely.
how you view that?
Coffee. And I remember I probably asked you how you got into your work and tell me, about your journey up to that point. And I don't know that you actually used that term, but a light bulb went on when you were talking about, I felt like I had gotten to this place and I didn't see where I was going forward and, didn't feel the right fit. And I went, oh my gosh. I said, my son, who was recently turning 25 at that point, had said something about having a quarter life crisis. And I just kinda laughed in my head because I thought, "Who has a quarter life crisis?" You hear midlife crisis, and it was the way you talked about expectations of people in your age group about career and that you were, either from a peer standpoint or your own expectations expected to be a certain point by a certain time. And I think because your generation, or let me rephrase, I think younger workers today, and today I kind of put those in an under 40 and an over 40 kind of contrast. I think for you and people in your age group, the world moves so much more quickly than it did for me at that age. That when I was that age, I didn't expect to have clarity on, what my long-term stuff was or where I was contributing to the world and that kind of thing. But you just helped me see through his eyes more about why he was discouraged about X, Y, and Z happening or not happening in his own life and his own career. So I didn't snicker at it as much. I thought, yeah, it kind of makes sense in that term. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that was one of those great conversations where I learned something from someone younger because I was curious, and you just brought up something that was recently very relevant to me.
Mm.
So new term.
Yeah, yeah, I tend to always use the term quarter life crisis when I talk about my journey of how I started my business, and yeah, and I think the context kinda specifically that it seems like really stuck with you is how I share too, and I think this is, again, more common now, and I'm a millennial, and millennial, potentially Gen Z too, is that mm, previous generations, how they raised us, or again, I should stay specific to millennials, how I was raised, and a lot of millennials around my age, it was this idea that you have to go to college, you have to get a good job, then you get married, you have 2.5 kids, you live in a suburb, it was the American dream, and this was in all society, like in every movie, TV show, like this was literally the dream, and this is what we were supposed to want, or again, this is what my experience felt like. Like, this is what I was supposed to be doing, and this is I should be so happy. So when I hit 27 and I was getting promoted really quickly, climbing the corporate ladder, I was getting paid really well, I was working remotely before that was even a thing, and I felt like I was checking all these boxes in my career, and, like, I was in a career of what I actually studied in school too, which again is not that common, and it feels like it's not that common anymore, but it just felt like, "Wait, I'm checking all these boxes, but isn't there supposed to be more to this?" I'm like, "I'm 27, I can't be peaking already, and I feel like there's something missing, and I don't know what it is," and yeah, that kind of snowballed my journey, I guess, of finding something new. So I always think about that perspective when it comes to different generations too, is just thinking about how you were raised, and the previous generation or whatever generation is raising you, is that they're likely trying to make your life better than it was for them, right? And a lot of generations before you kind of have to think to how they were raised too, and it's almost like this, um, everyone's, like, almost overcompensating for what happened to their parents, it seems like, and again, I'm generalizing, but for, like, my parents, that was the dream, was to get a high-paying job, and you stay at one company forever and, like, be super grateful that you have insurance and you have a paycheck, and, yeah, I thought that was it, and then I had it, I'm like, "This isn't it, this isn't what I
Yeah.
want."
Well, and I'm gonna bring up a subject that is touchy because I was shocked about a year and a half ago when I learned that this was no longer a thing, but that and I've verified this with different people and who have agreed, but I think that the younger generations today, especially the Gen Z, there's not a concept of paying your dues in a corporate or a company or a business environment. Again, previous generations, you knew you would not get into your dream job out of college and that you had to do work that maybe you didn't love, but it paid the bills and you would earn credibility and whatnot. But that, from the informal research I've done, again, mostly just asking people, is that paying your dues in a work environment is not a thing. But it makes perfect sense because companies don't promise you anything today.
Mhm,
When my generation was younger, there were some of those long-term um, job opportunities where, and that was kind of being phased out, but there were people older than me in work who had worked for the company their entire careers and were retiring after 30 or 40 years with paid benefits and 401ks and all of these things that don't exist anymore.
mhm,
So it makes sense. That's another difference in generations that I've seen kind of raise its head as a point of conflict, is that some of the more experienced workers say, well, they need to pay their dues or they need to, just suck it up. But at the same time, and I always seem to come up with contrast, you can't be 22 years old coming into a job and expecting to be promoted to a VP in 6 months. So again, it's that finding that how long do you need to do a little bit of stuff maybe you don't like or the learning process versus as you discovered after several years, this is not my thing. Um, so it's just, yeah, it's just changed and changing so much.
Definitely. Yeah, I see that a lot too, is that, like, I would say probably the boomer generation is when they generally, again, we're generalizing all these generations, and I don't like to generalize people or ages or genders or anything like that, but it's just for our conversation. I know not everyone is the same. But for our conversation, it seems like generally boomers in the workplace, it was that, you stay somewhere, your whole career or most of your career, and that was success because then they would reward you to say, oh, you get the pension, you get the things you listed too. And that you would, I remember too, this used to be a thing, getting rewards for your tenure at a company, right? Every
Yes.
5 years, like
Yep.
the gold watch was something I never experienced personally, but is even in movies I've watched too. So it used to be that you would actually monetarily and physically get rewarded, if you stayed somewhere. And now
Yes.
that those perks are going away, it's like these unwritten rules of loyalty and expectation are still lingering in people's minds of, oh, this is how it's done, right? This is what we've always done. But now there's no reason to be doing that. So I definitely agree with the younger generations that, hey, I like to think about it as each job is a contract. And most of the time, you are literally signing a contract of some sort, whether it's an actual contract or an employment agreement where, hey, these are your job descriptions and we will pay you this much. And these are your benefits, right? So you show up, you do your work, you do your job, and you get a paycheck. Like that's the agreement. And since these last 5 years, we've seen so many companies lay people off, and I think it's just becoming so much more common to recognize that a lot of times employees are seen as numbers, and especially in big companies. So if the company doesn't owe you anything for staying there for several years, what do you owe them, right? So it's,
Right.
I know it's probably controversial, but yeah, it's an
Well, and
agreement.
you brought up a good point of a reason for more experienced seasoned workers to really dive into understanding generations because how many stories have you heard about these people who thought they'd work somewhere and they only had 3 or 4 or 5 more years before retirement and the company lets them go because
Mhm.
they're well paid and they can hire whatever, either cutting back costs or replacing workers or whatnot. Well, if they are stuck in the same mindset that they've had without learning more about how to communicate with younger workers, their chances of getting another job are going to be rougher and tougher. If they can walk into subsequent interviews and say, here are projects I've worked on with people from multiple generations and that kind of thing. To me, that's a skill that it could benefit them if they do get stuck in that position where they are let go without choice.
Yeah, and something else I think about too is that how much technology has changed and so quickly continues to evolve is that, again, back when probably boomers were growing up in the workforce, they didn't have email. They certainly didn't have email on their phone that they could access at home. And that's just such a different place to come from now, thinking, okay, you have younger employees coming in and you are expecting them to email you back on the weekends. Or again, it's usually this unwritten expectation where it's this nudge, nudge, right? Like, oh, if you don't go above and beyond and do all these things, we're not going to promote you. But hey, this wasn't a thing for you, and now it's suddenly an expectation for us just because technology is there, right? Like because we're moving so quickly, and I think that's part of the pushback from younger generations now and the work-life balance and mental well-being is that, hey, we can't be on all the time. This is unreasonable expectation, probably especially for the people newer in their career because like you said, they're usually in that role where they're maybe trying to make put their dues in or sometimes it's the lower tiered um the job that maybe people are leaning on to do some of the above and beyond things that aren't in their job description, and then they keep asking and asking for more and more and more, And that's exhausting too, and, like, there didn't used to be this gray area of, you used to work 9 to 5 and you go home and that was it, and then on Fridays, it'd
Let
be,
me
"See you on Monday."
I recently heard a flip version of that story where it was a manager with younger workers, and I think she was away at a conference, so I think she was doing work, but, work function, but out of town or something, and one or a couple of her employees texted her, and she didn't respond back within 30 minutes or whatever, and so this worker kept sending more and more texts, and so it was kind of the reverse of expecting that immediate response or immediate gratitude or immediate, and again, that's kinda shifting from, okay, how you do things socially doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
translate to work, and there's a reason for that. People are doing other things other than just responding to, so I think it's really important upfront for managers to establish those expectations so that, and honestly, even in writing for a new employee to say, um, for the employee, I mean, for a manager to say, okay, I won't contact you between this and this hours, or you don't have to respond. Or on the flip side, saying, I turn off my phone and am with my family all day Saturday and won't look at. In other words, just communicate up front. Because another thing I think about younger workers is they're so much more flexible on, I mean, like I know even me having my own business, there are a lot of evenings I work, not because I have to, but because that's a quiet, productive time for me.
Mhm.
And so I think if you have that manager employee relationship, as you said, so that a lot is not expected, and that's a question if a new employee comes in or a younger employee, that's a great question you can ask your manager upfront. Is, I'm learning about the job, trying to figure out what I need to be doing. When do you expect me or what hours am I expected to be available? If a manager says 24 hours a day, that's a red flag. And there again, different circumstances handled differently. But I don't see anything wrong with a new employee asking the manager, "What are your expectations? When are you available for me to come to you with questions? If I see a problem, when can I break?" Just things to not necessarily wait for somebody to tell them
Mhm.
specifics, but establish those up front so that you don't have that, "Oh, if I don't answer my boss, I'm gonna, not get the next promotion," because that's just too much stress.
That love that perspective and how it goes both ways again for the generations. It's like, we need to get clear on our communication expectations because again, there's just so many, unwritten rules that we're following that are made up in each person's individual mind, and we have no idea what they are, so, hey, if we just talk about these in the beginning when you're starting a new job, or, hey, if you've never had this conversation with your boss, do it tomorrow, right? Like, definitely
Mhm.
encourage that. And to go even further, adding on to what you said too, well, first of all, put it in writing. That would be really helpful, I think, for everyone is to actually get as specific as you can. But also think about the different platforms of communication and who prefers which platform for which thing. That's something I like to do with my clients even, but just in general in the workplace, I think it's really helpful for me. Like I don't like texting personally, so I certainly don't like to text much about work
Mhm.
stuff. And I
Mhm.
if I'm working, I'm likely at my computer. I want to be in a place where I can type and think through ideas and kind of sit with it. I don't want to be on the go and like distracted. I like to give it my full attention. So think about for you your communication preferences. Is it, if it's really urgent, give me a call. Or is it if it's really urgent, text me and then call me or text me and I'll call you back. Or hey, these are the types of things that are best for an email versus a Slack message. We have so many different ways to communicate now. It's exhausting. But it can be so helpful to just think through that for yourself and to then communicate it to other people to say, "This will be the best way for us to work together." And especially if you're sending things in Slack, I hear from a lot of people that they get lost or you send, kind of a half-assed sentence and you say, "Hey, can you send me that report quick?" It's like, "Okay, which report? How do you want me to send it? By when?" You know, let's
That
be
goes to the clarity issue
Mhm.
because it's somebody can't do anything until they know the answers to those questions.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So I guess that's kind of the main theme of today is clarity. I think that keeps
Yeah,
coming back. Clarity in our
it does.
communication, no matter what generation you're in, it will help all of us work better together.
Absolutely.
So as we are wrapping up today, do you have
Yeah.
anything coming up or any resources you want to share with listeners today?
I don't have any specific resources. I work with companies on an individual basis. I do have a program that we go through, a process, but it looks a little different for each company. So we start by assessing where people are, what they need, and then go from there. So there are no particular things, but I'm always interested to connect with people. If somebody has a quick question and they want to send me a message, I'm happy to talk to them or send them an email back, or a LinkedIn message. The best way to get in touch with me is either through LinkedIn, direct message. I'm Charlotte W. Berry at the Communication Advantage or the Communication Advantage is the name of the company. And my email address, if you prefer that, is Charlotte at thecommunicationadvantage.com.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And I will make sure I put those links in our show notes today so
Thank
people can easily get in touch with you. And thank you again for joining us today, Charlotte. This
you.
was a
Yes,
great
I
conversation.
enjoyed the conversation. The time's gone quickly.
It did. It flew by. And thank you, as always, to our listeners for joining in today. And what's one thing you want to take action on from what you learned today? And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a quick review or like on whatever platform you're listening on. It really helps other people find the podcast and, in turn, find the support that they're looking for as well. That's it for today. We'll see you in the next episode.